We're going to start with a few introductions, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the meeting format and what to expect throughout the evening. And we'll also go over some Zoom tips just for those that might need a little refresher if you haven't been on Zoom for a while. So let me start with those introductions. We are joined tonight by some of the people from the city who've been working on this housing plan update and identifying these draft locations for future housing. And this includes the city's community development director, Jeff Murphy. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to put your camera on there. We also have principal planner Eric Lardy. There he just waved. And we also have senior planner Scott Donnell. And there he is in the flower fields. Also with us tonight is Christina Ray, the city's communication and engagement director. And Christina is sort of the mistress of ceremonies this evening as well. And there are also a lot of other staff members who are going to be helping with the breakout sessions and making sure that we're capturing all of your input this evening. And all the staff has the City of Carlsbad in their name there, so you can see who they are. And you'll be working closely with a couple of them when you get to your breakout session. So why don't we go ahead and launch our slides. We're going to have a short presentation and to kind of walk you through a little bit about the format and some Zoom tips. And then we'll turn it over to the planning team to talk about the housing locations. So again, just reiterating the meeting tonight, the workshop is an opportunity again to better understand where the community thinks we should locate about 2,600 future homes in Carlsbad to fulfill the state requirements that require all cities in the region to provide enough housing to meet anticipated needs. So our agenda for the night, and we've really tried to make these virtual workshops as much as close to being in person as we can. So there will be an opportunity to provide feedback on your experience from this evening after the meeting to let us know how we did from that front. But the meeting will have two parts. So we'll start with a short presentation and focus on then some small group breakout sessions where you'll have an opportunity to provide feedback on the various locations that are identified for future housing. We'd like to really have you focus on why you think a particular site is good for housing and maybe why you think a particular site might not be so good for housing during those discussions. We'll have a summary of each of the group breakouts and identify some highlights. And then we will go into the second part, which is more of an open forum. So that'll give people an opportunity if you'd like to speak individually. We'll have an open Q&A as well. And then finally, at the very end, we'll just go over some next steps in the process. You can expect the conversation tonight to last till about 7:30, depending on how many people participate in the open forum, how many questions we have, that sort of thing, but approximately about 7:30. We have 18 potential sites that we'd like to get your feedback on, and we hope that we anticipate our session to be very, very interactive with lots and lots of discussion. So we're looking forward to this evening. So before I turn it over to the presentation, just wanted to give those who may need a little refresher on Zoom, just some of the options here. So if what you're seeing on your screen doesn't look like this exactly, don't worry. Depending on what kind of a device you're logging in on, sometimes the interface can look a little bit different. But just some of the highlights here from Zoom in the bottom left corner, you'll see there's a mute and unmute button. That just turns on and off the ability for us to hear you. So again, if you're not speaking, just keep that on mute. And then there's also an option for the video. So you can turn on or off your video. We're going to be focusing on having our video on. So we'd love for you to join us with that, but you don't have to. But when you do get to the breakout sessions, having the video on is very helpful to have a good, fruitful discussion. There's also a participant box you can see where you can click on that and it'll show you who all is in the room with us in the meeting. The chat button is there too. We would love for you to pose any questions or maybe some comments in there throughout the meeting. We'll be capturing all of those. Sometimes having a dialogue in the chat can be a little distracting for people, so we discourage you from trying to have conversations with one another, but definitely use that to share some of your ideas and thoughts and questions. There is also which I don't see on the bottom in this example here, sorry for the image, but there's also a raise hand feature in that bottom bar you should see on your screen. And that's an opportunity when we do get to the public comment or public forum piece, you can raise your hand and we'll be able to make sure that we recognize you and call on you. There's also up in the upper corner a speaker or gallery view. There are different ways for you to kind of look at the presentation and the workshop tonight. A gallery view shows you kind of everyone in the room. If you click on the speaker, it will highlight whoever happens to be speaking at the time. So you can play around with some of those options as well. And then for those of you on the phone, it will be a little bit, you won't be able to see what we're talking about or participate in the chat, of course, but you'll be able to follow along based on how we're summarizing in the presentation language. And also, you will be able to join the breakout sessions and actively participate in those discussions. And we'll be able to show you how to do that or explain how to do that when we get to those breakout sessions as well. And then finally, we have tech support. So if anyone's having a challenge, well, number one, if we end up having a challenge for some reason with the technology, just stay close to your email and we will for sure send you an email to tell you what happens next if for some reason we get cut off or that sort of thing on our end. But if you're having trouble on your end, Sarah just pasted her contact information into the chat. So Sarah Lemons is going to be our tech support. So if you need some help and can't figure something out, give her a call and she can try to walk you through whatever challenge that you're having. So let's do a little warm-up poll. Stacey, if you want to go to the next slide. We want to just hear a little, like figure out who's in the room, so to speak. So if we were all together, we might ask this question and we could actually have people raising hands and we could see each other. But since we can't, we're going to do a quick poll and share with you the results. So we're going to ask what zip code that you live, work, or have a business in here in Carlsbad. And if you have multiple, you live and work, you might just want to choose one or the other, whichever one you prefer. So we'll go ahead and launch a poll and you'll see some choices come up on the screen. You should be able to click on the one that most closely matches. We might need to stretch that out a little bit because there is another option there at the bottom. There's an other, and there are also, I think there's about 8 or other zip code choices there. So it looks like we have about 30 folks in the room right now. We're expecting a few more, but we'll see where we're drawing some of the participants from. And we'll share those results in just a minute. But if you're having trouble with the poll, you can also just paste your answer into the chat and we'll look at it from there as well. But this is just a way for us to get a little sense of who's here with us tonight. Looks like we've got about 75% of the folks have chosen their zip. And a couple are pasted in the chat as well. Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and end the poll and we'll share the results. There we go. So it looks like almost half are from 92008 with another significant group, maybe from 92011, and then a few from 92010 and 92009. So we'll need to do some work to get out to those other 3 zip codes there, right? And I'm sure they may be joining us throughout the evening as well. All right, we can stop sharing that one. And then just to get us warmed up for the conversation tonight, we are going to be talking about housing locations, but when you think about housing, housing is a part of a neighborhood. So we just want you to paste into the chat just what you think are some of the most important features in a great neighborhood. So what makes a great neighborhood in your opinion? And just paste some of those features into the chat. So give that question a thought for a second. So I see view and charm, definitely 2 important features. Trees, we all want to have great trees in our neighborhoods. Walkability, open space, definitely important to a lot of people in their neighborhood. Open space again, single family homes, good communication with your neighbors. These are all great features in a neighborhood. Safety, quiet, consistent, long-time neighbors, a pool, view, signage, public transit, stores nearby, single-family homes, homeowners, off-street parking, safety, some large lots for single-family homes. Awesome. These are all really great ideas. You can keep posting those in and we'll keep taking those, but just kind of helping us set the context for what we want to talk about. When we think about housing, we want to think about neighborhoods. So we see again, some trees, retaining views, privacy, safety, walkability. Terrific. Thank you so much. All right. So with that, I am going to turn over the floor to Scott, who's going to explain and present a little bit on an overview of how the city has identified these housing sites, and also talk a little bit more about affordability, income levels, and the map that's been prepared that identifies the sites. So Scott.
Hey, thank you, Susan, and good evening, everyone, and especially for taking the time out to participate in this instead of enjoying the evening outside, perhaps. And I do want to start off with some background to give you some context for this project. And I'll start first with the city's general plan. And I bring that up because that's really our blueprint for how we want to grow as a city, where we want to locate our housing, our commercial areas, what's important to us in the way of trails, how streets should be, things like that. And because it's a long-range document, it's meant to direct the city for a number of years, actually through the year 2035. And it's broken up into chapters that cover different subjects: transportation, land use, and in our case, housing. The chapter is called the housing element, and it's the city's housing strategy or housing plan for how we address all aspects of housing, whether it's a shelter for a homeless individual, whether it's senior citizen homes, whether it's housing for large lot single family or above moderate income families. And while the general plan has a very long life through the year 2035, the housing element actually is a little shorter than that. We just adopted our housing element in April of this year, and it provides our blueprint or guidance on housing through the year 2029. And unlike the other elements of the general plan, it's the only one that's subject to state approval. After the city council approved our current housing element in April of this year, we then sent it off to the state for their approval, which took place in July. And a very large component of the housing element or the city's housing strategy is accommodating forecasted growth. And by that, I mean the state, again, is involved in preparing growth estimates for all regions of California, not just San Diego County, but all other counties and all cities throughout the state. This growth forecast is then delivered to the local council of governments. In our case, that's the San Diego Association of Governments, which through a formula distributes that state forecast to the different jurisdictions. So the forecast for Carlsbad is different than it is for Santee, for Lemon Grove, for Encinitas, and so on. But the important thing is every city, every jurisdiction has an estimated growth forecast in terms of the number of housing units. And if we go to the next slide, what this means is the growth forecast is an estimate of the number of housing units that we need to provide per 3 different income categories. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. But what the city of Carlsbad's obligations are is to provide those housing units in terms of opportunities. We need to identify sites where the housing for the different income categories can locate. Carlsbad is not mandated to build the housing, but we are obligated to provide actual sites, pieces of property that developers can then build the housing on. We must also identify these sites at suitable densities. These densities have been determined by the state to be appropriate for either the lower, the moderate, or above moderate income categories. And in the state's eyes, the denser a project, the more affordable it is. The challenge we have here in Carlsbad, of course, is oftentimes, regardless of the density, a project is not affordable because we're in coastal Southern California. Land here is just too expensive. So projects may be affordable, so to speak, in name only if we determine affordability based on density. Next slide. So as I mentioned, a growth forecast as estimated by the state, delivered through the San Diego Association of Governments. That process is formally known as the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, also known as RHNA. And this is Carlsbad's allocation. There would be a different allocation for Encinitas and the other cities in San Diego as well. But speaking about just Carlsbad, for the period 2021 through 2029, it's estimated we need to provide nearly 3,900 housing units. We need to provide sites to enable that number of units to be built in the city. And those units break down by the 3 different income categories you can see here. The greatest need for housing is in the lower income category. And as I mentioned, the denser the housing, the state considers the denser housing to be more affordable. We have 3 different income categories here. The first 2 also have income stated, and that's just to give you some kind of context. When we talk about lower income housing, we are talking about, for example, a family of 4 earning no more than $97,000. For that housing to be affordable to that family, it must be based on that income maximum. For a housing unit to be considered affordable to a moderate income family, that family, for a family of 4 again, would earn no more than $114,100. So that gives you an idea of the income limits for, say, lower and moderate income families. Now, the important thing to note here is Carlsbad has plenty of single family home detached land already designated for that purpose. We have no trouble providing land and accommodating the units that the state estimates are needed in the above moderate income category. The challenge lies in the first 2 categories, lower and moderate income. And let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. And fortunately, what we can do is subtract things like existing residential sites that the city has already in its inventory that haven't been developed yet. We can also subtract from that initial RHNA number projects that have been approved but haven't been built, as well as pending projects. So that initial RHNA estimate, that 3,873 units, actually can be reduced by our inventory as well as pending and approved projects. But with that reduction also comes an addition. Based on state guidelines, the state recommends that cities also build in a buffer. And that buffer actually raises the number of units slightly that we have to provide. That buffer is necessary because we know that sites that develop on lower income designated properties based solely on their density, that not all of the units built there will actually be affordable to lower income families. With all that said, what we have here, these 3 numbers represent our target number, or the number of units that we have to provide sites for. And that's why we've identified potential sites to accommodate these units. And again, the majority or the greatest need is in the lower income category. About 85% of our total target number is necessary. We do not have the sites today to accommodate these nearly 2,600 units. And that's why the term rezoning is used here, because we have to identify properties that might presently be designated for commercial or industrial uses, or for low density residential that would have to be redesignated or rezoned. For example, changing an existing industrial property and rezoning it to permit housing. Next slide, please. So the question is, how do we identify the sites? Much of Carlsbad is already built out, but there still are vacant properties eligible. The problem is they're not currently all designated for residential use. So we posed the question both to a citizens advisory committee as well as to the public last year, both through an online survey as well as an advisory committee that met throughout 2020 that debated this very issue. That was asked questions such as, what are good criteria for locating housing? And based on the input from the public, as well as the Housing Element Advisory Committee, as well as direction from city policies and restrictions in state law, we could come up with ways or methodologies to identify where appropriate locations are to locate housing. We then, as staff, looked at the city of Carlsbad's land use map and identified vacant properties that could be compared against this housing. Next slide, please. And with the information based on the criteria, the input from the public, our review of existing potential residential sites, all of that information was presented to the City Council last year in August to receive affirmation or further direction with regards to the methodologies or to the sites that have been proposed. We received confirmation of the information that had been presented to the community, as well as run through the Housing Element Advisory Committee last year. And that information and the sites identified made their way into the city's housing element. The housing element was sent out for public review late last year, as well as through public hearings held early this year to adopt the housing element. We are now at the point of having potential housing sites identified. We are coming back to the community now to ask questions such as, why is a location good or bad for housing? And what are some aspects of the specific sites that have been identified that perhaps the city hasn't considered? We started a 45-day public review process that began just prior to Labor Day and will run through October 22nd for the purpose of gaining your input and then compiling that input so that we can present it along with a list of sites later to the City Council for their review and further direction. Next slide, please. So here are the sites that have been identified. You may have seen a map like this before. It identifies actually 18 different sites located throughout the community. As you can see, many of them are located along Palomar Airport Road, some El Camino Real, and some in the northern part of the city. All of the properties, regardless of location, are color-coded. The light blue color, for example, indicates government-owned properties, potential properties that the city or North County Transit District owns, which could be developed with housing. The dark blue represents commercial properties, which also could be rezoned from commercial to residential for the purpose of building housing. And the other colors, the yellow, the orange, also identify different types of properties, all of which indicate potential sites that could be redesignated for housing purposes. Now, I present this map, and I also want to make sure you consider it in the context of the next map. The next map that you'll see has even more color coding on it. And the point of this next map on the next slide is to identify not only potential housing sites that were shown on the prior slide, but also other properties that are already designated for affordable housing based on their permitted density, as well as sites that already contain developed, built affordable housing. And while this map contains a lot of detail, it might be difficult to see. The point of this map is to indicate that simply if you see all of the different colors here, each one of them indicates either an existing, an approved, or potential affordable housing site. In each quadrant of the city, whether northwest, northeast, southwest, or southeast, each of the quadrants contains a site that is either already developed or potentially could develop with affordable housing. And the next few slides are just to give you an example of different densities and what the state considers that would be eligible for the different income categories. And for example, this is simply a picture of new construction in our Robertson Ranch area. These single-family detached homes were built at a density of about 5.5 units per acre. Based on state criteria at such a low density, these homes would be considered affordable to above moderate income families. Next slide, please. And the second slide has a higher density, nearly 15 units per acre. The Bluffs project is a condominium development located south of Tamarack Avenue, very close to Agua Hedionda Lagoon. At a density of nearly 15 units per acre, this project would be considered affordable to moderate income families based solely on the density alone. Next slide, please. Another example of moderate income housing at nearly 23 units per acre is the Village by the Sea condominium project. You may have seen this development before along Carlsbad Boulevard. The first floor contains shops. The upper floors contain condominiums. This project at about 23 units per acre is another example of moderate income housing. And the final example on the next slide is a project that was actually developed at 50 units per acre. This is a development known as Tavarua in the city's Barrio neighborhood along Harding Street. This project is truly a low-income housing project, not just based on its density, but also on the fact that all of the units are deed restricted to senior citizens with incomes that are considered low income. So unlike the other projects, which may be affordable to certain income categories based on density alone, this project has deed restricted units and is actually occupied by residents with lower incomes. So with these density examples and in keeping in mind what the state requires in order to achieve different income categories, I hope this information, the review of the maps, the little bit of the background on the general plan and the housing element will help you through your further conversations. And with this brief overview, I'd like to turn the presentation back over to Susan.
Great, thanks so much, Scott. That was great background information. So now that you have an idea of how and why the potential sites were selected, we want to give you a chance to explore them in a little bit more detail. So there is, Scott showed an overview of the map. When you get into your breakout sessions, we'll be able to dig in a little bit closer. That's an interactive GIS-based map so that you can actually see them closer up as you're talking about them. But in your small groups, we want you to think about these two primary questions. One, what sites do you think of the sites being presented are good locations for housing? And not just do you think they are, but why? So going back to some of the reasons why they might be appropriate for housing. And which sites do you think are not such great site locations for housing? And again, asking the question of why is that? So some of the responses, maybe it's about traffic concerns, or for the reasons why you think it's a good site. Maybe it is because it's on a transit line or it's close to services. So thinking about some of those criteria and ideas about what could make it a good site for housing. So we do want you to, we want to allow for some input on ideally all 18 sites, but we are going to ask when you move into your group, maybe you've had a chance to take a look at the map before coming into the workshop. So if there are a couple of sites from those 18 that you specifically want to talk about in your introduction when you get into your small group, you can make sure that you state those to your facilitator. Otherwise, the facilitators will be going through all those different groupings of those sites to have some discussion. We're going to have about 30 minutes in the small group breakouts, probably about 8 to 10 or so community stakeholders in each of those groups. So it'll be a small enough group where you can ask some questions and kind of dig in a little bit more into those sites. You'll have two staff members there with you, one serving as a facilitator and one serving as a scribe. We'll also ask for a volunteer from the community to present back when we come back together and share some of the highlights that you talked about in your small group. We also have Scott and Eric and Jeff available for questions. If there's questions that your facilitator maybe doesn't know the answer to, but that are going to help inform your discussion, we can certainly have them drop in, and they'll probably be dropping into the different groups anyway to listen in and be able to give you answer any questions you have about those sites. At this time, I'd also just welcome Melba we can offer a room purely in Spanish if that is desired, and I'll allow Melba here to offer that. If you could state that in Spanish and ask people if they're interested to paste into the chat or do the raise hand. So Melba, if you want to take yourself off mute for a moment.
Yes, thank you. A las personas que desearan participar en esta reunión utilizando el idioma español, podemos designar una junta específicamente para personas que hablan español. Simplemente levanten la mano y los podemos transformar a una de estas salas de reunión. Gracias. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Melba. We'll watch and see if there's anyone that requests that room. And just a note, I don't see anyone else on calling in, but if you are calling in and I just don't see it, if you press *6 on your phone, that will allow you to engage into the conversation in the small group. In just a moment, you will be moved into your breakout session automatically, and your facilitator will start those conversations. So let's go ahead and launch the breakout sessions. Welcome back. For those of you that are back, I still see a few people still in their breakout room, so we'll give them a few more seconds to join us automatically. You could choose to leave the room when you saw the notice pop up, or they'll be automatically put into this room. So I see some folks coming. There we go. All right. I think looks like we have everyone back. Well, welcome back, everybody. I dropped in most of the rooms and I heard some good discussion happening about each of this, or a lot of the sites. I'm sure you didn't all get through all 18 of them, but if you did, congratulations, that's great. Before we jump into the presentations, we did want to just remind everyone, if there was a site that you felt like you didn't get enough time to talk about, there is an online survey that allows you to comment and just look at each site individually and make some comments and share your thoughts on that. So we welcome everyone to do that, as well as sharing your thoughts this evening. So we have hopefully each group identified a guest or a volunteer presenter to share some of the highlights of your small group breakout. And we will start, how about with room number 1, which was Craddock, your room. Did you have a volunteer to share?
Yes, we do, and it is Allison.
Allison, great. Allison, if
Hi,
you want to
everyone.
there you are.
Here I am. So the main, I think, big issue is, especially in the north end of Carlsbad, El Camino Real is impacted. We have a ton of traffic. Sites 3 and 4 came up several times. At least 3 people talked about site 3 as a bad option. And there's several schools right there. There's a lot of traffic right there. The school's already impacted. But also somebody mentioned, if there's a problem like a fire, we can't get out because El Camino Real is kind of a parking lot. We can't get to the 78. We can't get through. We can't get south. And so that was another big issue. Another big thing that came up was fairness, because the Northwest quadrant is pretty saturated with high density housing. And it feels really unfair to several people that it is taking more than its share. And so there's a big safety issue also because of all the schools that let out. There's a lot of people that walk down Chestnut, cross El Camino Real from all the different schools for the kids to go home. And so to add more cars, more traffic to a place that's already congested, you can't drive down. We can't get off our street onto Chestnut half the time when they're either letting in or out of school. So where's the access road going to be, and how is that going to interact with all these kids walking to and from school? The other big issue that came up was disability, people with disabilities and housing for them. And an advocate for people with disabilities suggested 2 main areas would be near the mall or downtown, because the people can walk. So if you, or roll, if you have disabilities and you cannot drive. And then Bressie was the other area that would be good choices for people with disabilities. So I think the take home is not El Camino Real anymore, especially in the north area, and to have it and to account for people with disabilities in locations that are accessible. I hope I
Thank
got
you.
everything for you guys.
Yes, excellent job. Thank you.
And perfect on timing, because I forgot to tell everyone, we're asking each group to share for about 2 minutes or so. So that was perfect, Allison. You were right at 2 minutes, and I didn't even give you that as a precursor. So thank you. But I will, if her group or group 1 has any quick additions, open it up for the group.
Yeah, I had a quick one to add. Someone had mentioned in our group just spreading out the housing, that the North Quadrant, especially 92008 zip code, already has a lot of a lot of apartment buildings, and they wanted to add that one at the mall that someone had mentioned has like 1,000 units. And they were just mentioning just spreading it out evenly across Carlsbad, that some areas seem to have a lot more affordable housing than others.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think Allison started talking about the fairness and the northern saturation, but that's a little bit more detail to it. So
Yeah.
Thank you, group 1.
Yeah, no problem.
How about group 2, which was Bree and Melba? Do you have a volunteer?
I was volunteered.
Oh.
So I'll be just sharing the notes I took throughout the conversation. Regarding site 1, people think it's an underutilized commercial property, and therefore it's a good fit for development. People have seen other areas. They cited a mall in Salt Lake City that combines housing and commercial multi-density apartments next to the mall, which seems to be really good. It's close to public transportation. The jobs are available right there. And definitely the concerns for this site were all about traffic and access. And it needs to be addressed. For site 2, also this is where the shops are located right now. Same feedback, very underutilized space. They can make it mixed use, and there were some concerns about an overlay in regards to the rising sea levels, which seems to be a non-issue. Apparently that's not an area where there should be a concern like that. There were no concerns about site 2 in terms of, other than traffic. I think that was the common denominator amongst all the sites. Site 3, it's near public transportation, near a major traffic corridor. Shopping and services are near the site. Those were cited as positives. And concerns is that, of course, this is an older neighborhood and the site is already in a highly impacted area. Traffic is bad. There's also a concern about an aviation fuel line that might be a hazard. Traffic during school starting and ending hours are a concern. And also the development height might, encroaching on existing views for residents already living there. For Site 4, people liked that the smaller, trying to rezone to residential, but not adding commercial on top of that because of the El Camino Real traffic conditions, lack of access to the 78, to the 15. It seems like right now the layout is not, it doesn't offer enough capacity and people are already using that area as an overflow parking. So people are already being impacted by lack of on-street parking. The other site we spoke about was Site 14. And for Site 14, the concern was that the views might be considerably affected for people living in the west side. Traffic will be even worse. There's already a lot of housing concentration in the area. And also they wanted to protect the reserve on Cannon going to Oceanside because there's no additional pathways out of the city for people who live in Calavera Hills. That's all from my part.
Great, thank you very much. Any quick thoughts from group 2 that Melba didn't cover? Sounded like you went through about 5 sites, got through 5 of them. Terrific, thank you, Melba. How about into room 3, which was with Tom and Emily?
Good evening. I failed dismally in my efforts to get a volunteer reporter, so I'm going to do it back, but the group did promise to chime in if I miss any key elements.
Okay.
We started off talking about Site 4, and one of our participants raised a concern that the retail stay on that plans for that site. It's a good site for retail, this person thought, and they really wanted to maintain that along with any additional residents, which actually led to part of a theme through our discussion about the relationship between density and affordability. We were lucky to have Jeff Murphy in our room, and he added to that. We were talking about how the state, as help for everybody, I think, how the state equates density with affordability. And that's one thing to bear in mind. We then moved to Site 3, and the concern that was raised there was about the impact on traffic and transportation in that area. This feeling that it's kind of already has a busy El Camino Real running past at high speeds onto a slower Chestnut. And that was a concern we discussed there a lot. The issue of affordability came up a lot, and just what it means to people in not only to the residents, to the people buying the house, but also the developers. What it means for a developer to take that risk, what came up a lot in our group, and the need to find appropriate property. And then we double back to retail at that point, with people pointing out that a lot of times you need to have the density to support the retail, which is kind of interesting concept going back there. Another issue that was raised was, given the need to combat climate change by reducing greenhouse gases, the importance of keeping these sites near transportation corridors, available public transportation, was stressed by one participant. I think that's worth noting. I'm wondering if I missed anything else in my notes here.
I'll chime in, Tom, since
Please.
we can share the responsibility. I don't think we talked about Site 3 yet in our summary. Site 3 was the other site that came up.
I did mention Site 3 was the one that they talked about the traffic and the concerns.
Yeah, with El Camino Real and concerns about causing increased collisions along that area. Otherwise, I think we got it all unless anyone, community member wants to jump in from our group.
Thank you. From group three, any group three members want to add? I see Ron waving his hand up there. If you want to unmute yourself, Ron, we can't hear you. I think Ron was with your group, right?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I got it. It seems to me like, you know, the purpose of this meeting is the provision of housing, not the reasons why we can't do it. Most of the conversation is about the traffic, the noise, the difficulties, and all that kind of stuff. But the fact is that Carlsbad needs 25, 26, 2,700 more housing units. And what it seems to me like the focus of all of these efforts has to be on what is it that we can do to provide more housing.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for those extra comments. Room 4.
Yes, that was my group. And Shireen has agreed to share with us.
Hello. Overall, as a group, we voiced concerns about the sites in the village and also site number 3, which is the El Camino Chestnut area. As far as the village for sites 1 and 2, 14 and 15 were not ideal for development. And also there was a concern about people that had bought property in that area and buying property in this area, you know, and you know, having a certain property value and views that you were told that you were going to have, and then the views are going to be, you know, taken away. So those were some concerns in the village. As far as site number 3, there was concern with traffic and the inability to have the existing road extend into Chestnut. So there would only be one way in and out of that area for all of that dense housing. And the inability for that to be a safe way to come in and out of the area and be able to get up to 55 miles an hour from that road or go down to a safe speed to be able to turn into the road. Also concerns with having children right there on El Camino. As far as the areas that were deemed better for more moderate or affordable housing or denser housing, we identified sites 10, 11, and 12 as better because they were closer to business, industry, and jobs, you know, better jobs that were in that area, and also had the support of public transit in the area as well. And if
Perfect.
anybody else wants to add something from our group, please feel free.
Thanks, Shireen. Anyone from group 4 like to add anything? All right, we're hearing none. Well, thank you for those great report outs and look forward to reviewing all the detailed notes that the scribes were taking as well. I was trying to jot down some things while each group was presenting, and probably you can all agree that you've heard several times about site number 3. There seem to be some commonalities around concern around site number 3, dealing with traffic and safety in particular. I also heard a few times the idea of kind of fairness and saturation and making sure that there's enough distribution across, not focusing on just the northern part of the city, but ensuring it's distributed. On site 14, there was a couple groups that talked about view impacts in particular and being an issue for that site. A couple of differences were sites 1 and 2 were identified by one group as possible good sites because of the idea for they're underutilized and a potential for mixed use, where I think another group was talking about maybe those not being such great sites. Both groups a little concerned about traffic. There's also a difference, I think, on site number 4, where there was one of the groups shared that it was not ideal for commercial, but okay for housing, where I think there was some other discussion around 4 being a great mixed use opportunity. So some differences there. Definitely heard concerns about traffic, concerns about views in a couple of the areas. And the idea of needing to accommodate people with disabilities, along with ensuring that new housing is on transit and close to services and jobs. So those are some really great takeaways. We look forward to combining all this input with the input from the next workshop, as well as the survey, because we're asking similar questions on that survey as well. So going to be combining all of that into a summary report that you'll be able to see at the end of the process. So those are some of the similar themes and some overlap. We do want to move into the next phase of our workshop tonight, unless there are any final comments or points anyone would like to make regarding the group discussion. Thank you all for committing that time to having those good, deeper discussions about the sites. Perfect. Well, we would like to then open up the floor for public comment. If you would like to make a public statement or a statement, you could raise your hand using the raise hand function ideally. We will have a short little timer that we'll put up and be able to give you about 2 minutes of time to make your comment. And then we also will move into some direct questions. There were a few questions that were posted into the chat. If you have questions that you'd like to pose into the chat, you certainly can do that as well. And we'll have our technical team respond to as many of them as we can. And so if you pose a question during this comment period, we'll also document that, but we'll answer all the questions at the end. So if you can make a comment or pose a question, but we won't answer the question right away, if that makes sense. So I've got a couple of folks lined up to speak. I see, Ron, were you raising your hand like you'd like to get in line there? I saw you, okay. So I saw your physical hand raised. So we'll put Jennifer, Joe, and then Ron. If anyone else, let's see if we can into the chat. All right, well, how about we start with Jennifer, if you would like to unmute yourself and please welcome your comment.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure that I spoke for the people that might be living in these affordable homes. I'm hearing so much discussion about why we don't want them in our neighborhood. We don't want these homes here. And I'm hearing very little discussion about what can we do for the people that live in Carlsbad who maybe can't afford to live in a single family home. Our disabled people, our poor, our senior citizens who are on fixed incomes. So I just want to be a voice for them, I guess. And I want to make sure that we're mindful of not just putting our low-income housing in an industrial zone because the space is there. I'm like, yeah, but we have to think about what is in that industrial zone for these people. Can they walk to a store? Are they going to feel part of a community? Can they walk to work? Can they get to the grocery store? So I just want us all to please be mindful of the people who are going to be living in these homes. And I understand people don't want large homes being built next to or large apartments being built next to their home. But I hope everyone can be compassionate and think about the people that we're talking about here who are going to be living in these areas. And that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Joe, if you'd like to unmute and welcome your comment as well.
Yeah, I just want to re-emphasize my opposition to upzoning Site 3. I just wanted to state a couple things. Anybody who is thinking about upzoning that, I would like them to go to that corner in the morning and the afternoon and see what that traffic is like there. It is really bad. The other thing is we kind of about talking about neighborhoods and what we have one of the oldest neighborhoods in Carlsbad, at least not quite, but it was built in I think 1964, and as I said in my group, that half of my neighborhood are original owners. Okay, they're senior citizens now. They bought their house in the mid 60s. I just think it's a fairness issue. Plus, it's a horrible site. If you look at how steep it is, you look at everything that's involved with that site, it's a horrible site to put apartments like that. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. We'll go to Ron and then to Sue. So Ron, if you want to unmute. Oh, you're still muted, looks like.
There you go.
There we go.
You know, I've attended meetings like this. It seems like all of my life since in the early 1970s, because I've been developing real estate in North County during that time. And I've never attended a meeting where people showed up and said, you know what the problem is? We need some more housing. And what we have to do is we have to focus on that's the problem, and that the state has mandated that that's the problem. Now, what's going on in your neighborhoods is important, and we all have our personal lives. But what we really have is an enormous shortage of housing. And there are developers and builders in this county that can produce them. If only there was a political opportunity where every time we attend a meeting like this, everybody is against building. So all I can say is maybe one of you in this whole meeting might get the point of view, which is that the problem is not what's going on that street corner that you're particularly concerned about. The problem is we don't have enough houses.
Thank you, Ron.
You're welcome.
Sue, if you'd like to unmute yourself, great.
I'd be glad to. I want to say, first of all, that I am appreciative of comments from Jennifer and Ron asking us to step back and look at the bigger picture. But I think what's exciting about this meeting tonight to me also is that Carlsbad is acting for input from the people who live near those sites. And honestly, you can be the best planner in the world, but if you don't know the traffic flow, if you don't know the problems within that particular site, then it's very hard for you to pick the very best site. So thank you, Carlsbad, for letting those of us who live near those sites put in our comments and our thoughts. And again, I'd like to iterate that Site 3 is, in my opinion, a poor site for additional housing.
Thank you, Sue. Looks like we have a couple other folks that have raised their hands. John, you unmute, there we go.
Yeah. I'll also turn on a light. I said this in my group, and you know, I know it's part of the notes, but I really think when I think about affordable housing, I think about transportation, I think about where work is happening in industry, access to neighborhoods, access to public transportation for people who don't have their own cars. I'm mindful and aware of the Sandag plan. I'll put a link to their the regional plan draft in the chat, but that's why I think the sites recommended along Palomar Airport Road are ideal, not because they're in industry, but they're in places where people work. And as Sandag works on its 5 big moves for transportation throughout the region, it's going to create more connectivity to regional transportation from the north all the way into what we see happening in La Jolla, through to the airport and into inland. So yeah, I think, and not just affordable housing, but the need to identify deed restricted affordable housing, because rent continues to go up in the city of Carlsbad, and it's not accessible for your frontline workforce. And so, and I also agree with equitable distribution. The north part of Carlsbad is heavily impacted. And so adding more impact to that area doesn't, it seems counterintuitive. So thank you. I'm really happy to be participating in this conversation with you all this evening.
Thank you, John. Diane. Diane L., if you'd like to unmute, you're up next. If you're speaking, Diane, you're still,
yes.
There you go.
Can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yes. No, you're good.
I just want to express my complete disagreement with the comment from Mr. Ron Ramos, the developer, that we need to have more housing. We do not need any more housing. There are many, many other places to go in this county, in this state, where there are houses available. That this whole idea of we have to build more housing is another brainwashing technique that we're being fed constantly. We do not need any more housing. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Diane. Elizabeth.
I mean, that was completely.
Ray, Ron, sorry, Ron, I just want to make sure we stay in order and keep just a comment. Don't take it personally, please. Thank you, Elizabeth. You're up.
Yeah, thank you for letting me speak tonight. I guess my biggest concern is I have 2 young kids, and I just want us, the city of Carlsbad to be mindful of where we're putting these housing and if it affects children walking to school. The particular site I was interested in is in Site 3, just because there's 3 major schools that are like thousands of kids go to the school: Carlsbad, Magnolia, and Valley Middle School, that we have to be mindful of all these kids walking to school and their safety, and adding, another driveway along Chestnut just doesn't seem really compatible for that area. And that was just my concern. And then my other concern is with all these housing is where are they planning on adding more schools, or what are they going to do to the schools? Because most of Carlsbad schools are pretty impacted already. So what's the city planning in regards to that?
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. We'll see if we can get a general response to that question during the question and answer.
Thank you.
And Teresa. Teresa, you're still muted. There we go.
Sorry, I had to unmute. I was typing. Yeah, I just want to reiterate that the village is being impacted unfairly. I have no issue with the industrial areas that are not being used due to COVID and other reasons. But enough is enough in the village. It's too much. And I think that most everybody in the group in all of the groups agreed with that. And in Section 3 as well. I see the traffic there as well. So I agree that 14, 15, and 3 are a no-go. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. I don't see any other hands up, or unless I missed somebody in the chat, or if anyone is having trouble using the raised hand, you can wave your hand and can try to call on you. All right, well, I see another, I do see one, Desmond.
Yeah, a quick question, and it might be for, I think, the upcoming session, and I'm just kind of getting my hands around the whole thing. So my question is the housing element plan, I think that's geared to growth, right? That's for people that don't live here necessarily. That's for people that will come from wherever, right? Massachusetts, Texas, wherever. It's meant to cover growth, right? Is that the housing element?
I will have one of our planners address that in just a second. If you just want to finish your question, we can talk about that a little bit more fully.
Yeah, no, it's okay. That's fine. Yeah, if we can answer in the next section, that's okay. Thank you.
I think it's a little more nuanced than a yes or no answer there, so I'll have give some time for that one.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you.
Oops. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, but give you one last chance to raise some hands. And if not, then we'll start going through some of the questions that have been posed and allow the team to respond. I know there's a couple questions, and Sarah, I'll just start reading these questions out loud from our list. Starting with, I think there were some questions about the survey. So when will the current survey be done, and when will the results be available? And I think the answer might have been posted into the chat, but maybe Sarah, if you want to respond to that question, as well as how are people finding out about the survey, the online survey?
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. So the survey will be available through October 1st. And we have been sharing the survey across a variety of our channels for communications, everything from our social media pages to Nextdoor to our regular e-newsletters. We're also putting flyers out in city facilities around the city. So we really try and do our best to make sure we're reaching as many people as possible. Obviously, there's occasionally people that we miss. We definitely encourage you to please help us spread the word about the survey. We'll make sure to put the link in the chat here in just a minute so you can share it with anyone that you'd like to. And then in terms of when the results will be ready, we are going to be compiling all the results and plan to present them to the City Council in early 2022. We're going to be looking at all of the input we get from the survey as well as these workshops to kind of refine the maps and the sites, and we'll share all the input as well as a revised map with the City Council in early 2022. And then I also just wanted to stress that this isn't necessarily a scientific survey, so we really treat the comments and the input that we get similar to those that we might get at like a City Council meeting. So it's really just representative of those that we hear from. I think that covered everything, Susan.
Yep, thank you. And I think there was another question about the original survey that Scott had mentioned in his initial presentation, how that one was circulated, and I think probably in many of the same fashion. And I believe that survey ended up with 4,200 and some responses. So maybe you want to just note that as well.
Yes, that's correct. And we'd be happy to share the link to where the results of that one are located on the webpage.
Great. Then let's see, there's somebody had asked about, oops, I just lost my question here. The basis for the housing element number, is it geared towards, to Desmond's point, is it geared towards growth from other places or just the housing element more broadly? Maybe Scott, you could address that, or Eric.
I can address that. So it actually is, the basis of it is numbers that are assigned by the California Department of Finance. The main driver for that is actually the relationship between birth and death rates. And so most of the growth that was assigned to the San Diego region is actually from those birth rates. There is actually some in and out migration that's factored in, but it's not the main driver to the number that was given to the region. And then that number trickled down to each of the cities.
And then I think Desmond was talking about just trying to, that the entire housing plan is geared towards people from outside, but that when you mentioned in migration, or the idea of kids being, you know, teenagers growing into adults and being able to stay in the city of Carlsbad, I think, is that factored in as well into the goals for the housing?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you. So another question was, is there an overlay that can be, or is there an overlay on the map that shows traffic at and around the sites?
This is probably a good segue to talk a little bit about just the process. So right now we're looking at different mapping options. What the next step would be is to seeking City Council endorsement of options to study in more detail. That would include a full environmental impact report that would look in more detail on what are the traffic impacts of adding these sites and upzoning these sites from it. So we will have that, but it's not something that we have today.
Thank you. Another question, do we know the area they would build out parking, and would that be high structures? So I'm not sure if that makes sense, that if I got that question correctly, but do we know, I think the question is about structured parking perhaps, and is that something that's being talked about? Or
I'll take this one too, but I think it relates to some of the questions that we got in my group. So for some of the sites, specifically the coaster station or the mall site, do we know what they would do with the parking? They would still be required to provide for the right amount of parking for what are the uses in those situations. There's different ways to do that. It could be some form of structured parking combined with additions of uses. But that would be something that would be designed specifically as we get to the site. But they would also be required to comply with the housing and height requirements that are existing in the zoning for those areas.
Okay, thank you. And I think someone posted that the question was really geared around site number 14 particularly, but I think you addressed that as well. I don't see any other questions unless I missed some, but looks like Mary would like to maybe add a clarifying thought on that last question that I maybe butchered. So go ahead, Mary.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I guess on the structured parking, my main concern over here facing out west is why NCTD is considering structured parking that would be multi-level when most of the parking out here isn't even being utilized unless it's the fair. So the fair, there's multiple cars out there, but I literally look out to this parking lot and it is empty 99% of the time. So why are we considering, high-rise structures and those sorts of things when we're not even utilizing what we have?
Okay, thank you for that. I'll let Scott or.
Yeah, I can try that one, Susan. Thank you. Mary, so it's speculative at this point to say how the site would redevelop and if it will redevelop. Potentially structured parking would be more efficient and would free up land for other uses. NCTD has expressed an interest in some kind of mixed use development on that parking lot. That could be the addition of housing. That's why we're talking about it as part of this project. It might include other uses too. And because of the redevelopment desire, structuring the parking, whether perhaps below grade or above grade, would enable them to use additional parts of their property for uses besides parking.
Great, thank you, Scott. I also wanted to note another question that was raised in one of the groups, but it's more of a global question that one of the facilitators thought we should bring forward. And the question is, why are cities not getting together to fight some of the state mandates? So I'm wondering if the city would like to respond to that question.
I'll go ahead and take a stab at that one too, and maybe either Eric or Jeff might want to jump in. There is opposition that cities have done with regards to especially the growth numbers, not only here in San Diego, but in other parts of California where cities have banded together to question or to file suit, I believe, with regards to the growth estimates. So it is occurring in parts of the state.
It looks like Jeff maybe wanted to add something to that.
Yes, we do. The city council and other city councils do adopt a legislative platform that identifies what, when bills come out from state, what they want to fight and which ones they will accept. Cities like Carlsbad and a lot of the other cities in the north, we work with the League of California Cities, and they do represent the cities on a lot of these initiatives. Particularly with a lot of the bills that are going through the state right now with accessory dwelling unit laws and streamlining, and there's a number that have been in the paper regarding by right development in single family neighborhoods. And so we do work with other cities. We send letters ourselves, but probably our biggest advocate and one we work with is the League of California Cities, and they work directly upstate as well.
Thank you very much. And it looks like we have one more hand raised there for a question or comment, and that's Teresa.
Yes, I agree with Mary. When Mary and I bought our condos, we were told by the developer that area was not going to be developed. So I just want to reiterate site 14. I would never have bought if I knew that, that was going to be the case, to be, built upon and impede the view that I have. And Mary has a better view than I do. So I just want to reiterate on site 14. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm not seeing any other comments or questions in the chat unless I have missed them. If anyone from staff sees something that I'm missing, please let me know. But hearing none, maybe we could put up that last slide and kind of share what to expect next. But thank you. First, thank everyone for attending. And oops, I see one more hand there. We have a few more minutes, so let me go ahead and recognize Allison. You have 2 minutes, Allison.
Okay, the point was just raised about promises made by the city, and
just that was a promise by the developer, I think, that she mentioned, but go ahead.
Right. So, well, no, not the developer. I've been here for 50 years. 30 years. I called the city before I moved in, and we were zoned for housing, and the adjacent lot was zoned on site 3 for housing. And so we bought it with a promise from the city that, oh no, that's a terrible place. It's never going to change zoning. We promise. And then my neighbor, who's also on this, who bought 2 years ago, called the city 2 years ago and was told the same thing. So it's like, how can we trust the city? If we call planning, we do our due diligence, and we're told something by the city, and is their word mean nothing? If each of us, when we buy in, whenever it is, 30 years ago or 2 years ago, are told that?
Thank you for that comment. So let's go ahead and move into the final slide here, just to share what's coming next. And just want to officially thank everyone for spending the last couple of hours with us. We really do appreciate all of your comments, and we'll be taking that all into the final set of recommendations that go forward to the City Council. The online survey is available until October 1st, and it's been pasted in the chat, and we definitely encourage you to share that with friends and neighbors and coworkers as well. We'll also be making sure that there's another workshop next week, and we would love for you to spread the word on that as well. The similar format, or the same format that we have tonight, depending on the number of attendees, we may have more breakout rooms. And just as Sarah noted, that the maps and the input will be presented to City Council in early 2022. So the input is being collected now, and the sites will be refined and presented to Council in early 2022. Learn more at the carlsbadca.gov/housing plan. There's a video on what is a housing element, some more details on the earlier process that Scott went over tonight, as well as the links to the survey and what will be the survey results that will be posted in the input summary as well. So once the City Council endorses a final map, then staff will begin the environmental review process that Eric mentioned as well. And that will be going on into winter 2022-23. So that's all, it's a fairly lengthy process to make that all happen. Just a note that you will receive an email tomorrow morning or tomorrow sometime asking your feedback on tonight's meeting. And so we welcome any and all feedback to make these meetings more productive and better as each time we do them. So please take advantage of responding to that. And just again, we appreciate so much your time and your energy this evening, and would love to see you next week and also have you input into the survey as well. Thank you so much for coming.